back to Into the Word, your weekly bite-sized dose of Bible with me, Pastor Jonty Cornford, and my co-host, Rev Ness.
Hey.
How are you?
I'm good.
We've been gone for a couple of weeks.
I know, we're back.
But we're back for our next season. Why don't you tell the listeners, what are we doing for our next season of the show?
We are doing Glittering Vices, Jonty and listeners. It's a look at the 7 deadly sins and their remedies. Isn't that exciting? And I've been reading this book by Rebecca Condike DeYoung, and if you can see it on the screen now if you're watching, it's a ripper. It's been really interesting. So I will be referring to her book throughout our podcast over the next couple of weeks. So this week we're going to crack the big scary one first up.
Yeah, we're talking about lust.
Woo!
So, and also something to mention up front as well is this is kind of a brother-sister season to our previous season about the fruits of the Spirit.
Yeah.
So we'll see what happens, but I reckon along the way we'll probably be identifying some cross-section stuff between a vice that we're talking about and the fruit of the Spirit that corresponds to that in how we can...
Almost acts like a remedy for the vice.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's right.
So it's pretty exciting. Do we want to... We've got a couple of Bible passages. We've got some little ones that we're going to refer to, but a big one that we're going to sit into is the one about the woman... I love this. The woman found in adultery in Matthew 5... No, wrong. John 8, 1 to 11. I find it interesting that she's found in the act of adultery, but you can't be in the act of adultery unless you're with another person. Yet she cops all the hate, doesn't she? Yeah. Do you want to give us the passage?
Sure. So this is from, like you said, John chapter 8. Interestingly, just looking at it here, this is an instance where verse 1 of a chapter starts in the middle of a sentence.
Oh, I love that.
So there you go. But we're going to start in the middle of this sentence at verse 1 of John chapter 8. But Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. At dawn, he appeared again in the temple courts where all the people gathered around him, and he sat down to teach them. The teachers of the law and the Pharisees brought in a woman caught in adultery. They made her stand before the group and said to Jesus, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the act of adultery. In the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. Now, what do you say?" They were using this question as a trap in order to have a basis for accusing him. But Jesus bent down and started to write on the ground with his finger. When they kept on questioning him, he straightened up and said to them, "Let any one of you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." Again, he stooped down and wrote on the ground. At this, those who heard began to go away one at a time, the older ones first, until only Jesus was left, with the woman still standing there. Jesus straightened up and asked her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" "No one, sir," she said. "Then neither do I condemn you," Jesus declared. "Go now and leave your life of sin." This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God. Wow. Always find that a phenomenal passage.
Yeah.
What do you reckon he was writing in the dirt?
That's so interesting. We've talked about this a couple of times off air. I like the idea, and I've heard it from you, that he's writing the names of the men who have slept with her.
I reckon he's looking down on the dirt and then he's looking up
Yep.
and he says, "Oh, there's Jeff over there. I'll write Jeff down."
Yep.
And then he looks up again. "Oh, yeah. Liam gave her a go, so I'm going to write Liam's name in the dirt." I wonder if that's what he was doing, and I wonder if they saw what he was doing and then felt condemned and therefore walked away. It's interesting that no one condemned her, not even Jesus.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
So while that's not necessarily about lust, they describe it as the act of adultery, isn't it? Yeah.
Sexual immorality is often a phrase that's used as well.
Yeah. So I wonder, was she married and having sex with somebody that was married as well, or was it a case of she was just a girl having sex with an older man or a younger guy? Who knows?
Could have been a sex worker as well.
Yeah, right. Could have been anything.
It's interesting. It uses this word adultery.
Yeah.
Which in 2024 Western Christianity we can often simplify down to things like sex before marriage.
Yep.
I remember in the VeggieTales version for those who grew up in the 2000s watching VeggieTales. In the VeggieTales version of the Ten Commandments, when it gets to you shall not commit adultery, it is I'm kind of paraphrasing, but it's something along the lines of you have to dance with the girl that you take to the rodeo. So it's this idea of faithfulness, right?
Yep.
And adultery is breaking faithfulness. In the context that this story takes place, it's far more complicated and also wrapped up in deep misogyny and a patriarchal culture, where it's actually more to do with the damage of someone's property, essentially. So if a man commits adultery, it's because he's slept with a woman who is married to another man, i.e. he has damaged another man's property. So it's more about honouring the property of the man than anything to do with the dignity and welfare of the woman.
Yeah.
On the flip side of that, quite hypocritically, a woman sleeping with anyone other than her husband, even if she isn't married, blanket, all of that was considered adultery. So to put that piece of context over this
Passage.
piece of scripture, who knows how many men slept with this woman, because we don't have heaps of context. She might have been a sex worker. She might have just been a woman in the town who had slept with a couple of men, maybe more, maybe only two. Like, we don't know.
Yeah.
But in any of those cases, she has committed adultery. And the only way that the men that had been sleeping with her had also committed adultery, most likely they hadn't, is because she wasn't married.
Yeah, wow.
So it actually didn't matter for them.
No.
But for the woman,
Yeah.
the law, the law of Moses, comes down so much more harshly on her, to the point where they're like, well, we get to stone her to death now.
Yeah. And it's interesting. I think that theme has prevailed into our Western culture today, really, because a woman is seen to be such a slut if she has sex outside of her marriage, and yet a man can boast amongst his mates.
He's a stud. Yeah.
Having sex with the girl at work.
Yeah. And I think having, not to age myself here, but having gone through high school relatively recently, I'm 26 now.
Yep.
So I graduated about 8 years ago. But I certainly, spent some of my schooling at an all-boys school, and I'm not saying all boys schools are bad inherently, either or, but there was a culture, particularly at a school with a sister school, an all-girls school.
Yep.
How many can you rack up?
Yeah,
What's your body count?
Shivers.
And we live in, and there's a whole conversation there about, well, if your parents aren't teaching you about healthy sexuality, then you're gonna be learning it from somewhere. And often nowadays, the alternative with the internet is pornography, is TikTok with influencers like people like Andrew Tate that teach these hyper masculine visions of masculinity and sexuality. There's I'm not saying it is the culture, but there is a culture, particularly around young men, that's a pornographized, if I can bastardize that word, culture around what sexuality and when we talk about lust, which isn't, we're talking before about, lust isn't simply noticing the beauty of someone. It's that secondary act of not just noticing and moving on. It's lingering on that and turning that into something.
What am I going to do with that?
Exactly. When that is celebrated by the culture that you're a part of, that's what then leads to just completely warped ideas of what sexuality and sex look like amongst men. And I'm purely speaking from my own perspective as a young man. That you then get these adults that are completely not adjusted, wrestling with lust, that then comes out in all different ways depending on the person, whether it's violence, whether it's sexual violence, whether it's different forms of deviancy, which I'm not making a value judgment about any of that stuff either. But unless it's dealt with, you end up with a young man that grows up into an adult that has real, and we don't talk about it in the church, but it's a massive thing in the church. Just look at the number of male celebrity pastors that quote unquote fall from grace because of issues with lust.
Yeah, can I tell you, I think lust isn't just a male thing, though.
No,
is
no.
it? You know, because you.
I was going to toss over to you now,
Yeah.
having heard the male perspective.
Yeah. I think lust isn't just a male thing; it's a female thing as well. Because and we're just talking heterosexual relationship here because that's what you and I both know.
That's our lens.
That's our lens.
Yeah.
So I hope this isn't offensive for anybody else that's listening.
Just apply your own lens onto this, and it applies too. Yeah.
Right. The idea of to have sex with somebody, you're each got to be lusting for each other if it's consensual, I would imagine, right? So I think the issue, it's just such a big topic. I find it quite scary. But
I have a hunch we'll do a whole hour on filthy hope.
Yeah,
So we're only just skirting the surface here. Yeah.
I do want to just say quite strongly, I think if a marriage experiences adultery, it is recoverable. If both the parties want to heal and go down a path of grace and forgiveness, it is fully recoverable. I think many people check out of relationships too quickly if one party has had sex with somebody else. And I think if you really love that person and you're really committed to that person, it's really worth working through that person's lust and what led them down that pathway, you know. And I'm just speaking that out of my own life experience. I know it's recoverable.
Well,
And when you put God in the middle of it, it's recoverable, because I can tell you, sex prior to being a Christian was quite empty. And then the moment that you make it the holy huddle, you pull in the Holy Spirit in the middle of your relationship and you've got this power threesome going on. I'm telling you, Jonty, it's good business. I think it's the way it's designed to be, you know, healthy and whole. Rebecca says this: lust is the habit of trying to engineer my own happiness for myself on my own terms. In lust, my own pleasure is the goal, and I decide where to get it and when and with whom. It's all me stuff, isn't it?
Yep.
Yeah. And Richard Foster says this: lust results from egocentrism and the belief that the person after whom we lust exists only to satisfy our unbridled desires. So that's almost like looking at somebody and looking at their body parts and lusting after them, not because of their personality or their kindness or their nature, but because of what you can do to them
For yourself.
Yeah. That's lust, isn't it?
Yeah.
So if lust is the vice, Rebecca says that the spiritual virtue is vulnerability. I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, I also thought of self-control.
Yeah.
As a fruit of the Spirit being a big one.
Flies right in there, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think even with self-control, you can still be having those lustful thoughts,
Yes.
right? We've got a passage on that, right?
Yeah, so in Matthew chapter 5 from verse 27, it says, "You have heard that it was said, you shall not commit adultery. But I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart." And it goes on to say, if your right eye causes you to stumble, gouge it out and throw it away. It's better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to stumble, cut it off and throw it away. It's better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to go into hell.
Bam. Dig your eye out, mate.
And this is red text. This is Jesus speaking.
Jesus, yeah. That's power language, isn't it?
There's so much to unpack in that passage, but
is.
I'll leave that for another day. 'Cause,
Yeah. What she also says is that the formation practice is developing spiritual friendships with people, you know. Rebecca Condike Young from this book, Glittering Vices, says, lust thrives in privacy and isolation.
Yeah.
And lustful people often feel shame, which also motivates them to keep their struggles hidden from one another. But when we hide our sin and deny it, we cannot confess it or deal with it. This means lust's remedy requires community, openness, and accountability. I like that.
That's really good.
It's
yeah.
amazing,
I really
isn't it?
resonate. Like you see so often
Yeah.
in cases where lust has publicly turned into something where someone is convicted of something.
Yep.
I'm skirting around quite a serious topic there.
Yeah.
It happens in isolation.
Yeah. Secret.
It's an individual that has just festered, and then it's
Yeah.
lashed out in a particular way. And
Yeah.
the solution, I don't want to say the solution to that is community, because that's not a blanket thing that fixes everything. But like a solution to that festering, undiscovered thing that, and I'm not saying just with men, just in general, can fester and turn into something really ugly. That isolation just makes that so much worse.
Yeah.
So much worse.
Yeah.
So I really like that.
I do too. She says that good friendships teach us how to respect one another. So to develop friendships with probably maybe the opposite sex, if that's who you're attracted to, that are really plutonic and wholesome and real, where you're respecting one another deeply, and it's not built on lust.
Yeah.
It's built on deep mutual friendship.
Yeah.
You know?
I feel really lucky that particularly in high school, throughout those years of my life, I had some really close female friends.
Yep.
That, of course, as a young teenager, as I start to grow up and go through puberty, you start to notice that, you know, where your attractions are. But I actually had established friends that were entirely platonic, that were of the gender that I was discovering that I was attracted to, which meant that I kind of started to grow that muscle
Beautiful.
of actually being able to have female friends.
Hang out.
Yeah, and it not be anything more than that.
So good.
Which I know a couple of people that is an issue,
Right.
that have never been able to have, in their case, female friends.
Yeah.
They've always ended up being the object of, they're pursuing them romantically.
Right.
And it just never works. It never works. And I think the ability to have platonic, and if we're talking as Christians, spiritual friendships that are entirely based on friendship is so important. Because I actually think my own thought is that really strong romantic relationships, a massive percentage of that is based on friendship.
Yeah.
It's not just friendship. Obviously, it's much more than that. But if you don't have that spiritual friendship connection and it's just built on things like attraction,
It's not going to last.
it's not going to
long.
last, mate.
No, that's exactly right. She says this, and I think this is beautiful. If your relationships with others and with God adequately feed your need to love and be loved, you will both see through and despise what lust has to offer.
I like that.
Yeah, I do too. So build on relationships that feed each other, that don't require lust.
Yeah.
You know, lust, it just feels grotty, doesn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
It really does.
And I think to really simplify it down, and this is an oversimplification, but you can compare lust directly to love. Lust feels gross and feral, like you said.
Yeah.
In the moment, it can feel
Yeah.
exhilarating and exciting.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, it just leaves you feeling gross
Empty.
and empty.
Yeah.
Yeah. Whereas
Absolutely empty.
love, and we talk about love actually not just being one single thing. There are many different expressions of love that aren't just romantic.
Yeah.
Love, as Christians, we talk about God is love.
Yeah, fill you up, don't
Exactly,
they?
yeah.
Fill you up to overflowing, but lust leaves you empty, shameful, and in the dark.
Yeah.
Yeah, wow, that unbridled sexual desire, lust.
Yeah. Good one to start with, just straight into the deep end.
Sorry.
I think, because there's so much here that we haven't even unpacked. I think
it's a whole episode.
I think we dedicate, in the future we'll do a whole episode of Filthy Hope on this topic. So if you'd want to contribute to that, email us at filthyhopepod@gmail.com. But just, any questions or thoughts you have on this episode, send them there as well. We've obviously got our Facebook group as well that continues to grow. And
join in. We love those convos. It's
absolutely
really cool.
Yeah, so join us down below if you want to continue the conversation.
Did you hear what you said? Join us down below.
Link down below is what I meant to say.
I know, but it was just get your brain out of the gutter, Vanessa.
We'll be back next week for, what's our second vice going to be?
Gluttony.
Yeah, interesting.
I know, it's awful. They're not fun, are they?
No, but we've got corresponding good.
We do.
So we'll be back next Wednesday for Gluttony,
Yeah.
or you can join us on Tuesday as well before that for Filthy Hope.
Amazing.
We'll see you then. Have a good week. Thanks, Ness.